It wasn't the snowstorm that stung the most. It was hearing my own daughter say, "Maybe you should find somewhere else tonight," without even looking up from her glass of wine. Outside, the wind howled against the windows of their luxury vacation home, the same one we had spent summers in when she was a child. Back when laughter filled the halls instead of silence, I stood by the coat rack, clutching my scarf as if it could hold the pieces of me still breaking. Her husband said nothing, just refilled her glass, offering the kind of silence that spoke more than any insult could. The storm was already starting to ice over the driveway. The nearest town was 20 minutes away on a good day. Tonight, it might as well have been another world. I glanced at the keys on the kitchen counter. My keys, the ones she thought belonged to her now. But I said nothing, because sometimes dignity looks like walking away before someone takes it from you. I pulled on my coat, the old wool one she once called outdated, and buttoned it carefully, one slow breath at a time. "I'll find somewhere," I said quietly, not trusting myself to say more. I saw the flicker of hesitation in her eyes, buried under pride and exhaustion. But she didn't stop me. She turned back to her wine as if the storm outside had nothing to do with her comfort inside. I stepped into the cold, the wind cutting through the seams of my coat, snow stinging my cheeks like the truth I wasn't ready to speak yet. Not tonight, not this way. The house stood behind me, warm lights glowing through tall windows, like it belonged to someone else now. And maybe, in her mind, it did. But what she didn't know, what she had forgotten, was that beneath the snow and silence, my name was still on the deed, and no storm could change that. I made my way down the icy steps, the snow swallowing my footprints almost as fast as I could make them. I wasn't leaving because I had to. I was leaving because sometimes you let the storm teach the lesson words never will. The motel room smelled like dust and old coffee, but it was warm, and tonight, that was enough. I sat on the edge of the bed, coat still on, listening to the wind batter the thin windows as I scrolled through emails on my phone. No missed calls, no apologies, just quiet. Then, without meaning to, I opened the shared property folder in my cloud drive. A habit, really, one I hadn't thought about in years, and there it was. The vacation home, still listed under my name. I paused, scrolling further. Last year's tax documents, the property insurance renewal, every single bill paid by my trust account. Not theirs, mine. So when exactly did it become their house? I remembered giving them temporary caretaker access a few years ago, just maintenance and seasonal rentals while I was travelling. I never transferred the deed. Never signed it over. But somewhere along the way, that story changed. Not in the paperwork, in their minds. I closed the folder gently, setting the phone beside me on the nightstand. The snowstorm howled louder outside, pressing against the walls like a question I didn't want to answer tonight. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe letting them believe it was theirs had kept the peace longer than the truth ever would have. But peace built on erasure doesn't last, and something told me this storm wasn't the last one I'd face. I stood, unbuttoning my coat, letting it fall across the chair. Tomorrow, I'd call the attorney who handled my husband's estate, not to start a fight, but to remember where my boundaries used to be. Tonight, I just needed to sleep. The storm could howl, but it couldn't take what still belonged to me. The next morning, my phone buzzed quietly against the nightstand. Unknown number, local area code. I hesitated, then answered. "Grandma?" A hesitant voice. Young, steady, but uncertain. "It's Luke." It took me a second to place the name. My grandson, my daughter's oldest, almost grown now, college sophomore, always quiet at family dinners, always watching. "Luke?" I said gently, "Is everything all right?" He paused, as if weighing how much truth the morning could carry. I heard what happened last night. Mum said you left because you needed space, but that didn't sound like you. The words settled between us, careful but honest. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the ache in my chest softening slightly. I didn't leave, sweetheart. I was asked to. Silence stretched across the line, filled only by the soft hum of the storm still fading outside. Then, quietly, he asked the question no one else had. Is the house really hers? I closed my eyes for a moment. It's mine. I just let them stay there. For the family, Luke let out a slow breath. Not angry, just disappointed. She told us she saved for years to buy that place. She told us it was their dream house. I let the weight of his words settle. It was your grandfather's dream, long before she imagined it as her own. He was quiet again, then softer. I didn't think you'd want to fight over it. I don't, I said calmly, but I won't let the truth get buried because it's inconvenient. I heard his voice steady on the other end. Do you want me to come by? Help with anything? I smiled, warmed more by his offer than the motel heater ever could manage. Not yet. Just keep your heart open and your eyes. He exhaled, something like relief in his voice. Okay, I will. And with that, he hung up, quiet, simple, but not insignificant. The storm outside was dying, but inside this family, something had just begun to shift. The motel lamp cast a soft glow over the faded file folder I hadn't opened in years. It sat at the bottom of my travel bag, tucked beneath scarves and old receipts. I carried it more out of habit than need, or maybe out of quiet fear. I drew it onto my lap and opened the worn clasp. Inside, the original property deed stared back at me, its edges yellowed with time, but its meaning unchanged. My name, sole owner, signed in the months after my husband died, when I wasn't sure how to protect anything except what we had built. I remembered standing in that lawyer's office, my hands shaking as I signed the paperwork. The lawyer had asked me, "Do you want to list your daughter as co-owner?" And I had smiled, tired and stretched thin. "Not yet," I said. "Let her build something of her own first." I thought I was preserving her ambition. Instead, maybe I was preserving my own space in this world. But somewhere along the way, I stopped reminding her who built it first. I let the vacations blur the boundaries. I let the joy of watching her family grow there erase the fine print of ownership, until last night, when the storm came, and with it, the cold clarity of erasure. I closed the folder gently, brushing my fingers over the embossed county seal. This house was never about the bricks or the view. It was about the family inside. But when that family closed the door on me, what was I protecting anymore? I set the folder down beside the bed and turned off the lamp. Tomorrow, I'd call the attorney. Not to take the house away, but to stop pretending it didn't belong to me. The storm outside was quiet now. And for the first time in years, so was I met with Richard, our family's longtime attorney, in his downtown office. The kind of place where old leather chairs outlast business partnerships and truth rarely raised its voice. He greeted me with his usual steady calm. "I heard the snowstorm wasn't the worst thing that hit you this weekend." I smiled faintly, setting the deed folder on his desk. "Can you confirm this still holds?" He opened it, adjusting his glasses. "Your name's right here. No co-owner. No transfer of title. You're still the sole proprietor." He flipped to the maintenance agreement I'd signed 5 years ago. "This is the only thing your daughter has, a temporary caretaker designation. It gave her access to manage seasonal rentals and upkeep, not ownership." I let out a breath I didn't realise I'd been holding. So all those stories about them buying the place, the dream vacation home, that was creative license, he finished gently. No legal transfer, No purchase history. You paid the taxes every year, their names not anywhere near the deed. The truth settled between us, quiet and undeniable. I wasn't fighting for something I lost. I was protecting something I never gave away. Richard leaned back, thoughtful. What do you want to do? I stared at the window behind him, snow melting in thin lines down the glass. I don't want to take it away from them, but I can't let them rewrite how they got it. He nodded, understanding. We can issue a formal notice, clarify ownership, give them the choice to stay, with honesty, or leave. No court filings yet, I said, just truth. In writing, understood. He gathered the papers with practiced care. I'll draft something by tomorrow morning, quiet, clean, respectful. Exactly what I needed. As I stood to leave, he paused. You've been letting this slide for years. I smiled faintly. Sometimes you love people enough to let them believe they built the walls they live in. But you still hold the keys, he finished. I left the office feeling lighter, though the road ahead wasn't. Tomorrow the truth would knock on their door, and this time it wouldn't wait in the storm. I remembered the day I first handed her the keys. It was summer, 5 years ago. The house smelled of pine wood and salt air, windows thrown open to let the breeze chase out months of winter stillness. She stood by the kitchen island, holding her newborn in one arm, smiling the way new mothers smile when they believe the world is finally theirs to shape. Mum, we love it here, she said. It feels like home already. I smiled back, tired from the long drive but warmed by her joy. That's why we built it, I said quietly, so you'd always have somewhere to come back to. She laughed, brushing her hair out of her face. No, Mom, it's not just a family retreat. It's our fresh start, our own chapter. Her words stung, but I swallowed them down. I knew what she meant. So when she asked, can we manage the property while you travel? Maybe run the rentals, keep the place up to date. I said yes, not because I was ready to let it go, but because I wanted her to feel capable, secure, like she had built something herself, even if the foundation was mine. I gave her the keys that day, quietly, without ceremony, and in doing so, I told myself I was giving her independence, not my legacy. But as years passed, the narrative shifted. The house became theirs in conversations with friends. The story turned from inheritance to achievement, and I let it, because sometimes keeping peace means holding your tongue when the story drifts away from the truth. But peace, built on erasure, eventually turns to quiet grief. I thought of that summer day now, alone in a motel, far from the warm kitchen where she first called it home. Maybe my mistake wasn't giving her the keys. Maybe it was never reminding her whose hands built the walls. I sighed, folding the memory away for now. Tomorrow would bring a different kind of conversation, not about ownership, but about remembering where home really begins. That night, I sat by the motel window, watching the snow begin to soften under the streetlights. Everything felt quieter when the storm passed, but the ache inside me didn't follow the weather's lead. For years, I thought love meant stepping aside, letting someone else take the applause, letting them tell the story the way they needed it to sound. Because the story wasn't supposed to be about me, it was supposed to be about them feeling strong, safe, important. I let go of the spotlight so they could stand taller, but somewhere in that silence, I disappeared. I whispered the words aloud, the first time they felt real. I gave her the keys because I loved her, but I never thought she'd lock me out. It wasn't bitterness, just truth. And sometimes, truth feels colder than winter air. A soft knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Luke standing there, snow dusting his shoulders, concern in his quiet smile. "Mind if I come in?" he asked gently. I stepped aside, letting the warmth of the room close around us. He sat on the edge of the worn chair by the window, looking at me with the kind of honesty only someone young enough to see clearly and old enough to understand could hold. "Grandma," he said softly, "why didn't you say anything before?" I thought about it for a moment, then answered, steady. Because sometimes love means letting them feel like they built something, even when you laid every brick. Luke was quiet, letting the weight of that settle. Then he asked carefully, "And what happens when they forget who built it?" I smiled faintly, my heart both breaking and healing at once. "Then you remind them, not with anger, just with truth." He nodded, as if that made sense in a way words couldn't explain, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel alone in this. Tomorrow, I'd remind them, not to take anything away, but to make sure I didn't lose myself in the story I helped build. The next morning, Richard met me at the small town cafe where the servers knew his order before he sat down. He slid a manila envelope across the table as if handing me nothing more than yesterday's mail. "Drafted the notice," he said simply. "No threats, no demands, just a clear statement of fact." I opened it slowly, scanning the lines. It wasn't harsh. It wasn't angry. It simply read, "As sole proprietor of the property located at 48 Pine Creek Drive, I am clarifying that all permissions granted for occupancy and use were temporary caretaker designations, subject to review and revocation. Future use of the property must align with the terms of the original agreement. Kindly contact my office by Friday to discuss next steps." I smiled faintly, setting the papers down beside my coffee. "No ultimatums?" He shook his head, stirring his tea. "You don't need ultimatums. You have facts. Let them decide what kind of people they want to be next." That was why I trusted Richard. He didn't play the game to win. He played to leave the board intact when the game was over. I slid the envelope back toward him. "Send it today." He nodded, folding it into his briefcase without flourish. As we sat in companionable silence, I asked softly, "Do you think they'll hate me for this?" Richard smiled, kind but honest. "Maybe for a while, but one day they'll remember who kept the lights on when they didn't know what a mortgage was." I let that truth settle like the morning sunlight warming the cafe windows. This wasn't about keeping the house. It was about keeping my place in the story, a story I was no longer willing to be written out of. Tomorrow, the letter would arrive at their door. What they did with it was up to them. That afternoon, I returned to my own home, a much smaller, quieter place, but mine all the same. In the back of my desk drawer, beneath old tax forms and faded photographs, I found them, the original set of keys, silver, worn smooth at the edges from years of use, still labelled in my handwriting, Pine Creek. I held them in my hand for a long while, letting the weight of them settle into my palm. I remembered the day I gave them away, placed them in her hands, smiling through the quiet ache of stepping back. "Take care of it," I had said. And I thought she would. I thought she'd understand that caretaking isn't the same as owning. But somehow, along the way, the keys stopped being borrowed. They became claimed. Now, as I sat in my living room, the quiet hum of the heater filling the space, I realised something. I never stopped being the one responsible for that house. I just stopped showing up to remind anyone. I didn't need to change the locks. I didn't need to storm through the doors. I just needed to hold the keys again, not to control, but to remember who still carried the weight of legacy. I set the keys gently on my coffee table, not hidden, not flaunted, just present, waiting. I wouldn't use them unless I had to. But the simple act of holding them again felt like standing in a space I'd forgotten how to occupy. Responsibility doesn't go away when you step aside. It waits until you return, and tomorrow, whether they knew it or not, the door would still open for me. The dinner table that night was filled with the usual clatter of silverware and casual small talk. But beneath the noise, something sharper hummed. Luke watched his mother carefully, noting how easily she spoke of their home at Pine Creek, how the words slid off her tongue like second nature. "So we'll host the holiday brunch there again this year," she said, pouring herself another glass of wine. "It's tradition now." Luke set his fork down gently. "Whose tradition?" Her smile faltered, just slightly. "Ours, of course. We've been managing the house for years." He tilted his head, steady but calm. "Managing it isn't owning it, Mom." The room quieted a little. His younger siblings exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether this was playful teasing or something heavier. His mother laughed softly, but the edges of her voice tightened. "Don't start, Luke. This is family business. Your grandmother trusted us with the house." He didn't flinch. "Did she give it to you? Or did you just stop asking whose name was on the deed?" Silence. For a moment, all you could hear was the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. His stepfather cleared his throat, trying to smooth the tension. "Luke, it's complicated. Your mum has put years into that house. We've made it ours." Luke nodded slowly, respectful, but unyielding. "I'm sure you've cared for it. But caring for something doesn't mean you own it." His mother's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of something harder. Control slipping, narrative cracking. "I think it's best we don't discuss this at the table," she said, voice cool but brittle. Luke picked up his fork again, quiet. "Maybe it's best we finally do." He didn't push further. He didn't need to. The words had already done what they needed to do. He caught his sister's gaze across the table, confused, worried, but listening. The conversation shifted awkwardly back to lighter topics, but the weight of what was unsaid lingered. Later that night, as Luke sat alone by the living room window, he thought of his grandmother, of the quiet strength she carried when no one noticed, of the keys she never asked to be thanked for holding. Maybe it was time someone else stopped letting the silence write the story. The next morning, Richard called with the final draft. "It's not a demand letter," he reminded me. "It's an invitation to clarity." I smiled faintly. That's all I ever wanted. The document was simple, written in the same quiet tone we'd agreed on. "Please confirm your intentions regarding continued occupancy of Pine Creek. In absence of mutual agreement, caretaker permissions will expire as per the original designation terms. I am open to discussion before Friday. No threats, no legal jargon meant to intimidate, just clarity, framed in respect. But clarity often feels like confrontation to those who benefit from confusion." I signed the letter in quiet resolve, sealing it carefully. "Do you think she'll respond?" I asked Richard. "She'll react," he said, matter of fact. "Whether that's response or resistance, that's up to her." He would email the letter, but I also requested a printed copy sent to the house, not for drama, but because sometimes seeing the truth in your own mailbox carries a weight an email never will. I placed the house keys beside the printed notice on my desk when I returned home, not to remind myself of what I controlled, but to remind myself what I was responsible for. Legacy isn't about holding power over someone. It's about holding yourself accountable to what you built. I spent the afternoon reviewing the maintenance records, the tax payments, the insurance renewals, all in my name, all still mine. Not because I needed them, but because someone had to protect them when others forgot who signed the first check. By evening, the letter had been sent. The countdown began, not to a fight, but to a choice. And this time, I wouldn't be the one avoiding it. The letter arrived on Wednesday afternoon. It sat on the kitchen counter, unopened, as my daughter finished a phone call with the caterer for the holiday brunch she was planning at Pine Creek. She laughed loudly, masking the tension already threading through her shoulders. When the call ended, She picked up the envelope and stared at the return address, Richard's office. She knew exactly what it meant. For a moment, she debated tossing it in the drawer, letting it disappear beneath receipts and grocery lists. But curiosity, or maybe fear, got the better of her. She opened it carefully, scanning the lines that, despite their calm tone, cut sharper than any accusation. Caretaker permissions, expiration, mutual agreement, simple words, but they carried the full weight of truth. Her husband entered the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Something wrong? She hesitated, then handed him the letter without a word. He read it, jaw tightening. She's pulling this now, right before the holidays. She's not pulling anything, my daughter said quietly, sitting down at the table. She's reminding us it was never ours. The room fell silent, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant clink of wind chimes outside. Her husband spoke first. So, what do we do? She ran a hand through her hair, frustration rising beneath her carefully composed exterior. We talked to her before Friday. He frowned. You're going to ask permission to stay in a house you've managed for years? She met his gaze, steady but tired. Number, I'm going to ask if there's still a relationship worth protecting underneath all this. For the first time, she wasn't planning a defense. She was planning a conversation, but time was short, and pride, once broken, doesn't repair overnight. She called Thursday evening, her voice tight but measured. Can we talk? Before tomorrow. I agreed without hesitation, because some conversations don't wait for holidays or deadlines. We met at the quiet coffee shop in town, far from the house, far from the tension its walls carried. She sat across from me, hands clasped tightly around her cup, knuckles pale against the ceramic. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she broke the silence. I never meant for it to get this far. I nodded, giving her space. I just thought, after everything we did to take care of it, manage the bookings, fix the roof, host the holidays, it felt like hours. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, but she caught it quickly. I let the pause settle before I spoke. You told me once, in the middle of a snowstorm, that maybe it wasn't my home anymore. Her face paled slightly, the memory rushing back. I smiled softly, not bitter, just honest. Maybe you were right in one way. A home isn't about whose name is on the deed, but it is about remembering who built the door you're closing on someone. She lowered her gaze, words slipping through her defences. I never wanted to shut you out. I know, I said gently. But you did. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the coffee machine behind us. Then she whispered, almost too soft to hear. What happens now? I took a slow breath. Now, we stop pretending. You can still stay there if you want, but we acknowledge what's true. For your kids' sake, for ours. This story doesn't have to end where the snowstorm left it. She wiped her eye with the sleeve of her sweater, then gave a small nod. I'll talk to Mark. We'll call Richard tomorrow. It wasn't a full repair, but maybe it was the first brick. As we stood to leave, I said one last thing, quiet but clear. Next time you close a door, make sure you're not locking out the person who built it for you. And with that, we stepped into the winter night. The storm had passed, but the rebuilding was just beginning. Mark met me at the real estate office the next morning. No handshake, no smile, just polite detachment masked as professionalism. He sat across from me, adjusting his watch like we were negotiating a contract, not a family. So, he said, voice low but clipped, this is where we draw the lines. I met his gaze evenly. No, Mark, this is where we clarify what never changed. He leaned back slightly, weighing his next words. You know how much we've put into that house. Upkeep, renovations, holiday events. I know what you've contributed, I said calmly, and I know what you never owned. He blinked, momentarily thrown by the steadiness in my voice. I didn't file this to embarrass you or to take the house away from your family. I paused. But your family doesn't start with the walls. It starts with honesty, and right now, that's what's missing. He exhaled sharply, his frustration barely masked. So, what do you want exactly? Rent payments, full control of bookings, public acknowledgement. I smiled faintly, not unkind. None of those. I want the truth to be present at the table. If you live there, it's as caretakers, not owners. If you host holidays, it's with respect, not entitlement. Mark ran a hand through his hair, the first crack in his polished composure. And if we don't agree to that, I stood gathering the finalised documents calmly. Then you'll vacate by the end of the quarter. But that's not the outcome I want. This was never about evicting you. It's about making sure the next generation knows whose hands built the foundation, and that you didn't erase those hands to claim the view. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, she still wants you there for Christmas brunch. I smiled, soft but steady. Then let's make sure the invitation fits the truth. As I left the office, the winter air felt sharper, but the storm inside me was gone. This wasn't about winning. It was about not being erased. That evening, as I returned home, I found a small envelope waiting on my doorstep. No return address, no signature, just my name written in familiar, steady handwriting. Inside was a simple note, folded twice. The house feels different when you're not in it. Hope to see you Sunday. Luke. No apologies, no explanations, just quiet acknowledgement of where home really began. I smiled softly, setting the note beside the house keys still resting on my kitchen table. He understood, and maybe that was enough. Later, as I prepared dinner for one, my phone buzzed with a new text. Luke, let me handle the guest list for brunch. I think some faces have been missing from the invite. I stared at the message, warmth settling where anger used to live. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was the first time in years someone else in this family carried part of the responsibility without waiting to be asked. I typed a simple reply. Thank you. Nothing more, nothing less. That night, I sat by the window, the quiet of the house no longer heavy, just peaceful. Legacy, I realised, wasn't something you forced onto the next generation. It was something you protected until they were strong enough to carry it without forgetting who built it first. Luke didn't need me to explain the history of Pine Creek. He already knew it in his bones, in the laughter he remembered as a child, in the walls his grandfather built with his bare hands. And maybe, just maybe, the house would mean something more now, not because it had new owners, but because it finally had old truths returned to it. I poured a cup of tea and watched the wind settle the trees outside. Tomorrow would come. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to make it right, because someone already had, quietly, without being told. The house was quiet the next morning, not empty, just still. I stood by the window, watching the winter light filter across the hardwood floors. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel tight. The papers had been filed, the letters had been sent, the words had been spoken, and now there was nothing left but to breathe. I walked past the table where the house keys still rested. I didn't pick them up. I didn't need to. Ownership didn't mean holding them every day. It meant knowing they were there if I ever needed them again. Legacy isn't loud. It doesn't knock down doors or demand recognition. It waits, steady and quiet, until the next hand is ready to carry it. I sat by the fireplace, lighting a small flame against the morning chill, The crackle filled the silence in a way words couldn't. I thought of Pine Creek, of birthday parties and rainy afternoons spent reading by the window, of teaching my daughter how to swim in the lake, long before life taught her how to build walls. We lost something in those years. Maybe we'd find it again, maybe we wouldn't. But at least now, the story was honest, and sometimes that's the closest thing to peace you'll ever get. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the warmth settle into my hands. Tomorrow would bring holiday brunch and familiar faces. Maybe there would be awkward silences, maybe laughter. But today, there was only this: a quiet house, a reclaimed legacy, and the woman who finally stopped waiting for permission to return home. Sunday morning, the roads had cleared, but the chill remained sharp in the air. I arrived at Pine Creek just before noon, the front steps freshly shoveled, the porch lights already on. It felt the same, and somehow entirely different. Inside, laughter filtered from the kitchen, where the smell of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee softened the tension in the air. Luke greeted me first. No grand gesture, no fanfare, just a simple, steady smile. "Glad you're here." I smiled back, brushing the snow from my coat. "So am I." My daughter emerged from the dining room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her smile was cautious, but present. "Coffee's fresh. I figured you'd want your seat by the window." There was no apology in her voice, but there was something quieter: acknowledgement. I nodded, stepping into the living room where the sunlight spilled across the worn armchair that once belonged to her father. I sat without asking, without waiting to be invited, and no one said a word. Guests arrived throughout the morning: neighbours, cousins, friends who carried conversation like nothing had changed. And for them, maybe nothing had. But for us, everything had. Mark greeted me with a polite nod, offering a tray of pastries like a peace treaty no one needed to sign. I accepted it, not out of obligation, but because some bridges mend in silence, not speeches. As the meal began, laughter returned, tentative but real. Stories were shared, plates passed, the house lived again, not as a possession, but as a home. And for the first time in a long time, no one questioned why I was there. I simply was. The storm outside had passed, the one inside us. Well, some storms leave scars, but they also clear the air, and sometimes all you need is enough peace to eat your brunch in the sun, surrounded by the walls you once built, and the people still learning how to live inside them. After brunch, when the house quieted and guests drifted into lazy afternoon conversations, Luke slipped away. He wandered down the hall where the old family photos still hung, frames slightly tilted, colours faded by years of sunlight. Halfway down, he stopped in front of one photo. It was his grandmother and grandfather, standing proudly in front of Pine Creek's front porch, the paint still fresh, the windows bare of curtains. No party, no crowd, just two people who built something out of hope and sweat. He stared at their faces, young, tired, but quietly proud. In that moment, he realised something his mother had forgotten. The house wasn't just a home, it was a legacy, one built not from ownership papers, but from early mornings and late nights. No one ever applauded. He glanced at his own reflection in the glass, older now than they were in that photo, and still learning what it meant to carry what others had built. For the first time, the weight of it didn't scare him. It steadied him. He heard his sister laughing in the kitchen, the hum of conversation filling the rooms once again. Life continuing, legacy living. Luke gently straightened the frame on the wall, setting it level again. No words, no speeches, just quiet respect for what came before. As he turned back toward the living room, the late afternoon sun spilled across the floors, warm and golden, and he knew one day The decisions would fall to him, who to invite, who to forgive, what to protect. But for today, it was enough to listen, to learn, and to promise himself that when the time came, he'd leave the door open wider than it had been before. That evening, as the house emptied and the noise faded into quiet comfort, Luke found me sitting by the fireplace, the house keys resting on the table beside my tea. He paused in the doorway, hesitant. "Leaving already?" I asked, smiling softly. He shook his head. "Just thinking." I gestured to the seat across from me. "Sit. It's a good house for thinking." He settled in, the fire crackling gently between us. For a while, we said nothing. Just listened to the quiet this house rarely had when it was full. Then he asked, softly, "Will you ever give them the house?" "For real, I mean." I smiled, calm and sure. "One day, but only when someone's ready to care for it, not just own it." He nodded, understanding the difference. I picked up the house keys, turning them over in my palm. The world makes you believe that holding the keys means holding the power. But the truth is, leadership isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go, and who to trust when you do. I placed the keys back on the table. Legacy isn't about names on deeds, Luke. It's about who shows up when the pipes burst, when the roof leaks, when the family's too tired to argue. That's who owns the house. He smiled faintly, quiet, but sure, I'll be ready one day. I met his gaze, steady and proud. "I know you will." The fire crackled softly, filling the silence with something warmer than words. And in that moment, the house no longer felt like mine alone. It felt like a story still being written. One day, the keys would pass to new hands. But for now, they rested where they belonged, between what was built and what would be carried forward. That night, as the fire died down and the house settled into quiet again, I sat by the window, watching the moonlight stretch across the empty hallways. I used to think home was a place where your name was carved into the woodwork, where your signature sat on every paper, where every corner whispered your story. But now, I think home is simpler. It's where your absence is noticed, not your authority. It's where your quiet work built the walls, even if no one remembers to say so. And it's where you keep showing up, not because they need you to, but because you want to. I smiled softly, letting the quiet fill the room one last time tonight. The house will stand long after my name fades from the paperwork, but maybe they'll remember who built the door and why it was always left unlocked. And I wonder, quietly, without expecting an answer, when the time comes for you to hand over what you've built, will you hold on until it's pried from your hands, or will you let go, knowing the story keeps going even when your part of it ends?